There's a number of publishers who actually have storefronts. Now they're bigger and have the resources to do that, and they are in Toronto as well. But we've wanted an independent bookstore for many, many years, probably since it would have been 2004. And so the downtown Sudbury has come up with this program to get more people downtown. It's called Zero Vacancy. And so you had to submit your idea for a business. And I just said, okay, well, an independent bookstore. So that's what we did. But it gives us an opportunity to try to see if it can work. Firstly, the interest by the community. I want an independent bookstore. Does everybody else, though? And so we're finding that people are coming in and buying a book, but they're also buying a necklace or a scarf or, a mug. So that was the idea. Yeah. So, we're only 3 weeks in, and our Saturdays are pretty hopping. We've had authors come in and do signing, and people really like that.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 224 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, we have an interview with Heather Campbell, who is a publisher and independent bookstore owner. Heather spent over 25 years in communications and freelance writing, specializing in issues relevant to Northern Ontario communities. A graduate of York University with a BA in Sociology from 1992, she's combined her education, experience, and need to initiate by starting a local chapter of the Professional Writers Association of Canada and the Wordstock Sudbury Literary Festival. Joining forces with another local writer to start a new publishing house for the North is a natural extension of how she can contribute to creating a thriving literary scene in Northern Ontario. Now, I have a great chat with Heather, and you may recognize, because I haven't mentioned the publisher she is the publisher for, it is Latitude 46 Publishing. And if you're an astute listener, you may remember that was the publisher that Rod Carley, back from episode 189, had. And that episode was called Rod Carley From Stage to Page. And back to stage with Rod Carley. Well, did I really have Rod Carley at the beginning and end of that? That was a weird sort of thing. I never even noticed that till now. I'm looking at it on my notes. Rod Carley From Stage to Page and back to stage with Rod Carley. How come no one called me out on that? Probably because it was a visual that no one really looks at because you're listening to a podcast. But that is me babbling and meandering and beside the point. That great conversation with Heather of Latitude 46, both a publisher and now an independent bookstore in my old stomping grounds of Sudbury, Ontario, is coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is an opportunity for small publishers and independent authors alike to get their audiobooks out into the market. Findaway Voices has 43 plus retail and library channels for distribution, and if you're looking to find a professional narrator to work with, you can find him through Findaway Voices. There's two ways. You can go about it by using their sort of handheld approach where they actually have a project manager assigned. You put in your details of what you're looking for, and they'll find you between 5 and 10 of the best narrators from the thousands of narrators in their narrator pool. And they've recently launched a new marketplace where narrators can kind of hang their shingle up, and you can go looking for a narrator. So you can DIY it, or you can use their support to find a narrator. That's the great thing about Findaway Voices and why I love to use them, because it's up to you. How do you want to do it? Who do you want to distribute to? Do you want to distribute to all 43? Or are you going to some of the platforms With Findaway Voices, you have that control. You have that choice. You can find your way to finding more power and more options and more opportunities by working with a great company like Findaway. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you know I will not accept a sponsor that I don't already believe in, and I've long believed in Findaway Voices. I've been using their services for years. I have used the services to find a professional narrator. I've used their services to upload my own files when I've worked directly with a narrator, and, for example, that's what I'm in the process of doing right now. Now, because I was 3 weeks behind in the manuscript of Fright Night's Big City, my latest novel in my Canadian werewolf series, fellow Sudburyan Scott Overton, who is also a science fiction writer, who is my narrator and the voice of Michael Andrews in these novels, he doesn't have access to his studio because he lives on an island in the winter, etc., and ice is over, all etc., etc. But I was supposed to get the finished manuscript to him 3 weeks earlier so that the audiobook could be coming out simultaneously with the print editions and the ebook editions, which are coming December 21st. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to, Scott's not going to be able to work on that until January now, and that's my fault. But I'm only saying that because for all of the books in the Canadian Werewolf series, A Canadian Werewolf in New York, Stowaway, Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, and now Fright Night's Big City, and also the prequel story this time around, Scott has been my man. He has been my narrator. He has been the voice of Michael Andrews. So I work directly with Scott. I pay him up front, and then I upload the files to Findaway. I could have worked with Scott through Findaway. They have a Voices Share program. Like I said before, it's up to you. You have the choice. You have the control. So if you're looking for ways that you want to leverage audiobooks for your author career, you can check out Findaway Voices over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And now, comments from recent episodes. Both comments that I'm going to share today come from last week's episode, episode 223, Love Only Better with Paulette Stout. First episode via Twitter comes from @EdwinDownward, who said, Mark, I have to come right out and thank you for your final reflection on this week's podcast. Even your guest gave numbers that would have me popping a bottle of champagne. I've been fighting back by cutting those voices that make me feel smallest, and you spoke right into that. Thanks so much, Edwin. I'm glad you picked up on that, and that's why I said that. Because for anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, Paulette was feeling like she hadn't sold a lot. And I thought she had done exceptionally well for the release of her book, particularly considering the fact that she, even though it was a great cover, it was the wrong cover for who she was targeting the book for. She still did quite amazing. She had numbers that I know most authors would kill for. I mean, they were pretty decent numbers. And I think what happens as I reflected, and I'm going to reflect again here because, you know what, you're going to have to hear this multiple times for it to sink in. You're better than you give yourself credit for. You're probably doing better than you give yourself credit for because you're only attending to the exceptions. Like I said, comparing yourself to the killers and the people who spend $50,000 a month on advertising to get the numbers they get. It's like comparing yourself to James Patterson or J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. Compare yourself to yourself. So thanks, Edwin, for commenting, and I'm so glad that meant something to you. The other comment was a little bit more cheeky in nature, came on Twitter. This one came from Talina Winters, @Talina Winters, who said, and this is in response to something I did at the very, very end of last episode's podcast, after the closing audio. Yeah, I did that in the previous two episodes. I had a little snippet at the end. But Talina said, Mark, I may not always listen immediately upon release, but I always listen to the bitter end of the episode, even when you whisper. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, and you haven't listened all the way through to the very, very bitter end, you know there's just a teeny tiny bit, just a few seconds after the closing credits, or the outro, as we say in the podcast world. Thanks, Talina. I'm so glad you listened to the bitter end. Thanks for sticking it out with me. And it makes me want to try and stick in little snippets. I know one of my friends, Julie Strauss, has an amazing podcast that I love that comes out every Monday. It's called best book ever, and it's just, if you're a book nerd, oh my God, it's heaven. This podcast is just a delight to listen to. Even if it's a book I don't think I'm going to be interested in, it's always a fascinating discussion when somebody's so passionate about something that they've read, right? That's why we do this. That's why we're in this business. But Julie will often at the very end, and I can't remember if it's for her patron feed or if it's the regular feed, because I kind of listen to them kind of back to back. But sometimes after the closing of the episode, there's a little snippet from a blooper piece that was cut from the podcast, and I kind of love that. Although the blooper I had was something that she couldn't play in prime time because I said some adult language. I thought we were off camera or whatever. I was just goofing around. In any case, I'm hoping maybe there'll be more teasers at the end. We'll see how I feel when I get to that point at the end of the long day, where I am recording the show notes and all the fun stuff that I do. Okay, so that's it for comments from recent episodes. If you want to leave a comment, you can leave them for me over at Twitter, like these fine individuals did, at Mark Leslie. You can find me there. Or you can go on to the comments section over at starkreflections.ca for any episode. Any episode. Seriously, I dare someone to go comment on like episode 5 or something really, really old and see if I pick up on it. I dare you. Dare you. Double dare you. Okay, that's it for comments. That's it for dares. Well, maybe not it for dares necessarily, but that's it for comments. Let's get on to my personal update. Okay, so personal update. As you heard me mention in the Findaway Voices ad read, where I did throw in a little bit of personal, because hey, it's always about, if I can talk about how I personally interact with a tool, why not understand how I'm using it? So Fright Night's Big City, the latest book in the Canadian Werewolf series, I got out the door. I finally finished the very final post-edit, last rewrite tweaks on Sunday, December 5th. Got that loaded to the systems. Got the paperback formatted and loaded. I actually, because I get so frustrated using Ingram Spark. Their interface is clunky and doesn't always work on certain browsers, and I just didn't have the patience. But I do have to get the hardcover ready, and it's mostly, the interior is the same. It is the formatting of the case-bound hardcover that I need to do, so I download the Ingram template, and then I use Adobe InDesign to get that done. So I'll be taking care of that over the next few days, but the book doesn't come out till the 21st, so I do have some time. And I, because I've done this so many times, I'm not going to look at a proof copy. I know it'll be really, 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 really close, and let's be honest, not many people are going to be ordering the hardcover. I'll, email my list and say if somebody did buy the hardcover and the spine's off, I'll make it right for them. I will make it right by sending them something, because I want to treat my writers really, really well. So I finished Fright Night's Big City, but while I was in the middle of writing that, I mentioned my good friend Julie Strauss before, and Julie and I are going to be working on a collaborative writing project that I just want to talk about a little bit in this personal update. So I got it in my head a while back, and I purchased this cover from Juan Pedron, who is the cover designer I use for the Canadian Werewolf series and several other books. And it was the love story, the meet cute, of when Michael, my main character, my Canadian werewolf, when he met Gail, who in the first novel, A Canadian Werewolf in New York, when you meet her, you find out that she is his ex-girlfriend from years ago who comes back into his life because she knows he's a wolf and needs his help because he has extrasensory powers, etc. And Michael's still in love with Gail, but she's already engaged to be married, and the relationship is that he can tell that she still loves him because he can sense it, but she's not able to be with him. She has reasons about betrayal and other things that have happened in her life that she just wants to be friends. And so you've got this tension between these two main characters, but I've had a lot of readers want to know the story about when they met, because there's a bit of a Michael sort of, it's told through his point of view, so there's a bit of a flashback, not flashback, but he talks about, oh my God, Gail, I haven't seen her in 3 years when we dated, and blah, 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 blah. So I very loosely allude to that, but a lot of Michael's angst has to do with the fact that he's still in love with Gail. And that's a significant part of the Stowaway It's a significant part of Fear and Longing in Los Angeles when he goes to Los Angeles to try and get away so he can see if he can live a normal life. Just, be apart from her for a while, where he does discover a new love. And so that comes back into play, of course, in Fright Night's Big City when Michael, his new girlfriend, and Gail are forced to have to work together to fight the evil that is risen in New York City. But that's all to say that I've had enough readers want to hear Michael's story. So I thought, okay, I got a cover done for a book called Lover's Moon. It was going to be either a short story or a novella. I think it was initially supposed to be a short story. I realized it was going to be a novella length. And I wanted to write the romance story, standalone, a part of the series, obviously, but just it could be read as a standalone because it's how they met and how they fell in love. End of story, roll, credits, fade to black, that kind of thing. And of course, they break up shortly afterwards. But again, romance, they have to be together at the end. So I bought the book Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hades, an amazing novel. She's got some great worksheets in there. I went through the worksheets. I worked, probably got about 60% of them filled out. And I started writing it. And I started writing for the very first time from the point of view of Gail. And I realized that, like Michael, I put Gail on a pedestal. I worshipped her. She could do no wrong. I had trouble with her flaws because I didn't see her flaws. Because like Michael, like my main character, I was just in awe of this woman. She could do no wrong. And so I'm in a mastermind with Julie, and we ended up talking about it a little bit. And I love her romance, her women's fiction / humor / romance. It's a wonderful combination of all three. And in particular, I love her sense of humor. It's absolutely, that's how we bonded. Come on, over the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I think in one of our first conversations. How could we not be good friends? But I do love the humor that she has as well as in the books. And the Canadian Werewolf series does have a lot of humor. And so Julie is going to co-write it with me. I'm going to write Michael's point of view, and she's going to write Gail's point of view. And we've had several brainstorming sessions talking a little bit more about the backstory. And Julie's helped me come up with some really cool things about Gail as we've sort of brainstormed and put things together. So that is something we're going to be working on. I have the pre-order for Lover's Moon up. I'm not expecting... I think my diehard readers who really just have to read everything in the universe are going to love it. The average reader, it's not going to be like the humorous action thriller that the rest of the books are. It's going to be more focused on the love. Although... Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, although it did have the thriller-esque and the darkness and all that, there was quite a bit of love in there. It's somebody actually who doesn't read romance described it as a romance, or thought it was romance. And I guess technically, because they do end up falling in love and getting together at the end, I guess it is. But I would not ever call it a romance. It just has a lot of romantic aspects to it. But Lover's Moon is meant to be more of a romance, like to actually, somebody who reads romance could read it and go, yeah, that's a romance. I don't think it's going to be a best-selling romance, but any shape of the imagination, except for the fact that Julie's writing half of it, which is going to make it an awesome book. But it's going to be a fun project. I'm so looking forward to collaborating with her on this, and I think it's going to be, it's just going to be a great experience. So that is my personal update, writing Lover's Moon with Julie Strauss. But I've already talked to you, Arof. I have another book coming out, another co-authorship coming out, nonfiction for authors. I'll be talking about it probably in the next episode, but I've already chatted enough. Why don't we get into this conversation with Heather Campbell of Latitude 46 Publishing and Bookstore. Heather, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We have so many things to talk about, but I want to start on, you are involved in many facets of publishing, and I want to find out, before we get into the very first one I want to talk about, which is Latitude 46 Publishing, where did the book bug bite you? When did it all happen that you wanted to be involved in the publishing industry?
Well, I mean, my love of books, of course, like many writers and publishers, was as a child, and I read Trixie Belden and just absolutely fell in love. And so reading, libraries, bookstores, that they have been my happy places. And so being able to get to a point in my life where I felt I could actually pursue a lifelong dream. And so I'd spent almost 10 years being a freelance writer and had actually started the Sudbury chapter of the Professional Writers Association.
Okay.
And so when Scrivener Press decided to retire, I just felt like we needed to have a publisher still present in the North.
Right.
And by that time, I had already started the Wordstock Sudbury Literary Festival.
An amazing
And
festival. Yeah.
so it just, I don't know, it just called. And I spent some time talking to people, including Lawrence Stevens and Denise Roux from Prista Parole. I actually spoke to the executive director of the Association of Canadian Publishers. Went
Okay.
down to Toronto and met with her. Um, so I did my research first and realized the amount of work and resources that it was going to take to actually get it to the point that it could, live for decades.
Wow. So that's quite a bit of groundwork. And what was it like then in terms of getting Latitude 46 up and running? Because I mean, I think a lot of writers, when they think about publishing, it's like, okay, you have editors and people that you work with that kind of curate and decide what they're going to accept to publish, but it's not as easy as that, right? There's a lot more involved in terms of, okay, we've published, now what do we do? Can you talk a little bit about like that process and what it's like?
So the process of publishing, and so I, previous to starting the publishing house, I had actually done some self-publishing, not of my own work, but helping somebody else. So I ghost wrote a book,
Oh, okay.
and so they had somebody lined up to publish them, and it fell through. And so I said, okay, well, I'm sure I can figure this out, and that's what I did. And so that's where I kind of got into what are the steps to actually, getting a book to the printer, getting it distributed, selling it. What are the numbers that we're looking at?
Right.
And so in terms of self-publishing, the numbers are, a little bit lower than what you're going to get if you get into traditional publishing and have access to more markets, basically.
So when you did that, were you doing offset printing or were you using like a lightning source, like print on
It,
demand?
it was it was Lightning Source at the time, so that would have been 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And Lightning Source print on demand was like the new thing. And so I found Lightning Source. There was nothing else. I don't even think Friesen was doing anything at that point. And so you had to, put all your stuff in, and then they had to ship it to Canada. It was
Expensive.
expensive, but they had the distribution to Amazon and so forth. So that's what you were looking for, is how is maybe the book gets printed, but the way that booksellers work, they want a distributor, not
Right.
you. So I had to tap into that.
So you had to figure out, okay, I have to now find a distributor to warehouse my stock.
Well, it's not even just a warehouse. It's booksellers want to know that they can make a call or have an account, put the order in, and it comes together with all the other books they've ordered.
Okay.
And so I tried to find because it was a Christian book, I tried to find a Christian distributor because it's a very unique market.
Yeah.
And so ideally, you get a distributor and a sales team that can sell to those markets. Well, it was just kind of disintegrating in Canada. There was, I mean, I don't even know if there's anything at this point in Canada for the Christian market. So, you learn as you go.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to consider starting from scratch, because Lawrence didn't want to sell the business,
Right.
what it would take to build basically from nothing.
How long did that take then, that process?
It's still happening.
And you're celebrating your 7th anniversary soon, or have just
Yeah,
recently?
so in March 2022, it'll be 7 years. And when I started, I did all that research, and Laura Stradiato agreed to be a partner with me. And at the time, my son Mitchell Gauvin, um, who was trying to think if he must have had his master's in English and philosophy at that time. He's gone on to get his PhD, so he's now Dr. Mitchell Gauvin
Wow.
in English. And so that was our initial team. And but after 4 years, Laura decided that she wanted to do something else. And
Right.
we're still very good friends. And she actually came out to help me out at a recent book launch. So
Awesome.
um,
Well, yeah, she's still a writer in the field
yeah,
locally
yeah.
too, right?
So yeah, so 7 years later, so we are a literary trade publisher,
Right.
which means that we publish um, literary fiction, literary nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. And I will be adding some YA shortly.
So,
And so
okay.
that defines what kind of books I want to put out. And why did I choose that? It's just that's what I personally love that.
Right.
So I have to be in love with the books that I put out because it requires so much of my resources. So I've never taken any money from the business. I've only put money into the business.
Right.
So in the first 6 years, I had a full-time job. Plus I did the publishing house, which is very common. It's not
Yeah.
uncommon.
Yeah.
Many publishers, small publishers, so I'm an independent trade publisher, have to have other jobs, to get going.
Right.
We
So,
receive arts funding, so we get money from Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council of the Arts, and Ontario Creates, Canada Book Fund. I think that's it.
how important then is that sort of funding for a creative business in Ontario?
It's vitally important, which is why many publishers work together rather than in competition,
Okay.
because we want to support artists, writers, literary artists to create work and to have it read. And the bigger publishers, their focus is around making money.
Yeah.
That's fine. And so they often choose books that they can count on making a certain amount of book sales
Right.
and money on it.
So just to give writers who may be listening, go, ooh, Latitude 46. How many books a year do you publish? And then let's give a frank reality of how many are sitting in your. You do have open submissions, or how does that work?
I
Do you work
have
with
I have
agents,
open
or
submissions, and I started with about 35 submissions in the first year, and we're where are we, beginning of December, I'm just over 60 now.
okay,
So that it is, so on average, I get about 50 submissions. I'm publishing only between, the minimum is 4 and the most at this point is 6.
okay.
And when I do 6, that is just pushing me to my
That's a
limits.
busy year, I can imagine,
Yeah.
because again, it's not like you have a team, a warehouse of editors, and a whole bunch, right? Is it like a very small operation in terms of people? Do you freelance editors? Do you do the editing? As you know, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand that, because
So
that takes a lot of time.
right. And many indie publishers do the same thing. And that is I like to hire editors based on the book and the author. And
Okay.
so
All right.
we just did Gold Pours, Baror, Gatwenzi, and I say, do you have an editor you've worked with, or is there somebody that you'd love to work with? And she had done a workshop with Britta Brador, who happened to be at the festival, and so I knew Britta, and so we asked Britta to work with her, and she did. And I mean, it was that's the other part of publishing that you might not see, but it's so it's what I love. It's like when I see a young Black woman finally coming. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's your most vulnerable words on the page, and you're finally ready to give it to the world. And so it was just a delight to watch her be so inspired and get so much from that relationship, besides having a book um, out there in the world. And so um, yeah, I hire based on the book itself. And we Mitchell has edited a number of the books because he's a fantastic editor. I
Right.
mean, aside from being related to me, he's a really, really smart, talented young man. And so with Rod Carley, he's edited all of Rod's stuff. They have the same kind of sense of humor.
Well,
And
I can vouch because I enjoy Rod's books, and
yeah.
excellent, good stuff. So, I guess the question I was going to ask is, it sounds more like it's less of a, let's say, a warehouse of in and out submissions.
Mhm.
It's more of a curated partnership relationship where the author has a manuscript that you've decided out of the slush pile, this has merit. I know an editor, or we can maybe work with the writer to find an editor they like, and it's a real collaborative. So there's actually, it's not just this archaic, here's a contract, well, your book comes out whenever, we'll talk to you then. It's very much hands-on then.
So I have sort of a policy for myself, and this is after being in business, around 5 years, and I meet with every single author that I'm potentially going to work with,
Right.
and that is because we have to get along. We have to see things the same way. I need to know that they understand the publishing route they're choosing,
Right.
that they are going to work alongside to promote this book and get it out there, that they can work with an editor, all those things. And I've also met with people who have submitted to me. I felt like they had something promising, but they still needed some more work.
Right.
And that tends to be, younger writers. But I'm if I see something, and it's all based on everything that I've learned over the years, including the mentorship I've received as a publisher, the courses. There's so much professional development in publishing. I go to so many meetings with other publishers,
Right.
and that influences what books I think need to be heard, and that I also think that people are ready to hear or to
Right.
read.
So what would you say to a writer who's looking at Latitude 46, looks at the catalog of what you have, what you publish, and has something that they think has merit? What's some advice that you would give to them for either approaching you or getting it ready to submit to Latitude 46 for consideration?
Well, and you said the very first thing is check out my website, because that will tell you what kind of books that I look to publish. I don't do fantasy, magical realism, yes. And then we have submission guidelines on our website, and that will give you a very detailed checklist of what needs to be submitted. And please submit through the portal, because that's how I keep track of everything.
Right.
Because I mean, I get lots of emails. And so if it just comes in, I could go, okay, fine. I do kind of start, but you know, I I have times of the year that I get to go and look at the submissions, and like you can imagine, I can't read 60 submissions.
I'm sure you can.
I do sometimes give them to other people that are willing to read to give me some feedback on it,
Right.
but I eventually have to, make it the final decision.
Okay.
So I go to that letter of introduction. I want to know who, firstly, do you meet the mandate? So I get a lot of people who just submit, and it looks like they've done sort of a blind submission to all kinds of
Right.
publishers, and they don't meet my mandate. So, but I still have to go and look at that and figure it out. So
Yeah.
it takes time. So, just sharing, why you've written this book, what it's about, who you are as a writer.
Yeah.
If I see that you've actually done the Humber School of Writers program, you've got my attention there because I know then that you've learned to actually write well. And you likely understand the kind of publishing house we are. We're not the only publishing house. I mean,
Yeah.
there's lots of publishers who pick up Northern Ontario writers.
Right.
The
Was that a
difference,
mandate then? The writer from Ontario or Northern Ontario? Is there a specific sort of
yeah. So
focus?
our mandate is anybody from the north, like from Parry Sound all the way up to Peawanuck. So maybe somebody grew up in the north, but is actually living somewhere else.
Like
So
Waterloo or something?
well, I actually have somebody in Oakville now, somebody in St. Catharines, somebody out in Saskatoon.
They have
So
ties to
yeah,
Northern Ontario.
yeah. So these people have actually, were born and raised but left. I've been supporting the Muskoka Writers Group, and their contest winners, were able to submit to me.
Excellent.
Not just for publishing, but just to give them a little bit of feedback.
Yep.
And so I sort of bent my rules a little bit to,
Well, Muskoka is really close to Parry Sound.
yeah, well, the one person is like Huntsville is really not Northern Ontario,
Yeah.
but Rosso, I already have another author from there. So it was like, okay, well, I can deal with.
And
I can,
maybe the sentimentality or some of the content is applicable to readers.
yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you for sharing that. This is so exciting, and happy anniversary for this forthcoming March. But you've also done it, as if that wasn't enough work for you. You recently, independent publisher, you just recently opened up an independent store in Sudbury, Ontario. Can you talk a little bit about what led to your store and all of that?
There's a number of publishers who actually have storefronts. Now they're bigger and have the resources to do that, and they are in Toronto as well. But we've wanted an independent bookstore for many, many years, probably since Mary Pagnuti closed her bookstore. And Mary had approached me at the time. It could be 20 years ago.
Wow.
And it would have been 2004. And
What was the name of her store?
I think it was just Elm Street Books.
Elm Street Books was the
Yeah.
last independent bookstore in Sudbury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so at the time, I was just finishing a contract. My kids were still, relatively young, probably not even in high school. And it just wasn't the right time.
Right.
But she knew that if there was anybody who would want to do it, it would be me. And so the downtown Sudbury has come up with this program to get more people downtown. It's called Zero Vacancy. And so you had to submit your idea for a business. And I just said, okay, well, an independent bookstore. So that's what we did. I mean, really reasonable rent,
Right.
no commitment. It's for 4 months. I've even got a parking spot.
Wow.
And yeah. And we're
Downtown
located.
real estate's usually pretty pricey.
It is. I don't know how much it is without this program.
Right.
So if I stay, I'm sure I'll find out. But it gives us an opportunity to try to see if it can work. Firstly, the interest by the community. I want an independent bookstore. Does everybody else, though?
Right.
And at this point, I have books left over from the festival because we had to do our own bookshop.
Right.
And then, of course, all of Latitude 46 books. And then
Right.
I've one person that Brianna North, who brought in her self-published book. So
Right.
I put that in there.
That's great. I mean, because you have access to Latitude 46 books relatively easily. You know
Mhm.
people there. So
Absolutely.
that's a good one. And but you also have other stock sort of related to. It's sort of like a look and feel of people who love books will also love these kinds of what else is in the store?
So we have hand-built pottery by Killen Candy. And Shirley Harrison runs Sunflower Boutique. So she actually had a storefront
Right.
and closed it down in December last year. And so she does sort of pop up. So she's got a few of her gifty kind of items in the store. And so people were finding that people are coming in and buying a book, but they're also buying a necklace or a scarf or
Right.
a mug. So that was the idea. Yeah, so I mean, we're only 3 weeks in,
Right.
and our Saturdays are pretty hopping. We've had authors come in and do signing, and people really like that.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw that. So you've already had people. Is it drop-ins or they planned it ahead, or how'd you
no,
do
we
that?
planned it ahead. So this past Saturday, we had Lisa Kovala, who's the author of Surviving Studhoff,
Great book.
and yeah, and Gary Pettengola, who did the response, and it's a mindfulness book. And that was done under another imprint with Latitude 46 called Storia Books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if I come across a book that I think needs to be out there but doesn't fit the literary
Yep.
category, then I'll do it under Storia.
Oh, interesting. So anyone listening who's in the area, what are your hours, and do you have signed copies of some of these books that these authors have already visited?
They didn't leave signed copies, but I'm sure they'd come back and do that. And I've come to realize how important it is for readers to have signed copies.
Nice gifts,
Um,
right?
yeah, people really like that. So we have, oh my gosh, I forget who's coming in. We will have 2 people coming in on Saturday, and I think Suzanne Sharon is one of them.
Okay. You can
She
email me
will.
after and I'll add it to the
Okay.
post notes. Excellent. And then remind them, of course, to leave signed copies so that people can come in afterwards if they miss them and buy them for Christmas. Great Christmas gifts. I mean, a
Yeah,
book makes the best gift.
it does. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. And we've got lots to choose from. We have children's books, we have nonfiction, we have Jael Richardson's book in the store. Yeah, and on all of Latitude 46.
So
So
you are carrying some other titles then, right?
yes,
From some
just
other
just a
publishers. Does
few.
that mean you have a bookstore account with distributors, or how? Yeah.
We do actually, but I haven't brought any more new books in at this point. If somebody came in and said, can you order this for me? Then I most certainly would.
Right.
I'm at this point, I'm just, and this is why it's important to get the word out, is that we're there. Come on in, check us out.
Yeah.
If there's enough interest, then, I can make this work.
Right. Perfect. That's fantastic. What was something, I mean, you've been a publisher for a while and been in the business for a while. What was one of the things that maybe even caught you? I mean, you've worked with bookstores and distributors before as a publisher. Was there anything that kind of surprised you about the running the bookstore aspect of it that you hadn't been expecting?
Um, Retail is brand new to me. And sitting there waiting for people to come in is just a very strange, very strange to me. But we're able to work while we're there, so then that's fine. But
Oh yeah,
I
so
feel
you can be
like,
working on a book or something like that, right?
yeah, no, we've been designing covers for the spring this past week, and I have to do my meetings there. So we're just sort of thinking, we could make this our office and have a storefront.
Right.
Let's see how this works. So far it is. But one thing is I'm actually selling books, not just mine, but yeah. So I'm actually, like, I would do that at pop-ups, and it's not, like when your head's in the admin part or the design part or whatever. I mean, you are selling books in terms of the metadata that you send in to distributors and sellers. But when I'm actually standing there with a customer and they're saying, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what this book's about, or tell me what you like to read. And I'm doing a little bit of that.
That was my favorite part of book selling was helping somebody find the right next thing to pick up. And that is nothing like that feeling.
Yeah, it was a great feeling. And then I want to know, how did you feel about it? And I know that I've heard from booksellers, and the other thing that it helps me understand, and I think writers should be trying go work in a bookstore, because you'll see what happens right at that end part of book reaches reader.
No, it almost feels like that exposure, that understanding, you realize that as passionate as we are about books, potentially that maybe books are also, they're a transaction and they're actually fulfilling a hole. You're helping fulfill a hole in someone. Like maybe it's for entertainment, maybe they want to read a wonderful memoir, maybe they want to be inspired by poetry, whatever it is, right? That book is also a transactional item that is satisfying a need, just like going to the grocery store. It's like I'm hungry, but my mind and my soul are hungry, and how are you going to help me replenish that?
And it's like a full circle when you get to do that. And the festival in a way does the same thing for me. Is I don't know why, but I just love it when I program that festival and people come out of a session and go, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Like I learned, they'll say to me, oh my God, my head is just like exploding. There's so much great stuff in there. And it's like, yes, that's why I love to read. That's why I love to sit and listen to other people talk about the things that happen to us in our lives. And I don't feel alone anymore. I feel like I can connect with somebody else about these human experiences that we're having. That's what the festival is about to me.
Right. That is awesome. So as we get closer to wrapping up, is there anything you would just want to make sure writers know, either about the mystical world of publishing or mystical world of book selling, since you have a foot in each camp? What's something that you're like, oh, I wish writers understood this or knew this that could maybe help them working with a publisher or working with a bookstore?
Well, I think that like new writers who have that manuscript they've been working with for so long, they've been intimidated by the system, is go invest in an editor, because that editor will help you get it to the point of it being publishable, because that's the term that we use as publishers. Is this manuscript publishable?
Right.
How much do I have to invest in it? I've told and connected people with editors, this is what you need to do. Like, I know you've got something, but you don't have the objectivity anymore.
Right.
And editors are such a important part of a writer's craft. Like if you see the Toni Morrison movie, she had her editor, this white guy working with this vibrant Black woman. That was her team. And every single book she published was in that team.
Wow. Okay. Well,
and
thank you.
Finding your team is what's going to make for a really good, satisfying, lucrative writing career.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much. So can you please let my listeners know where they can find out more about you, about Latitude 46, your bookstore as well?
If you're on social media, find us on Facebook, Instagram, a little bit on Twitter, but not much, but mostly on Facebook and Instagram. And go to our website, latitude46publishing.com, and you'll find all our books there, how to reach us, submission guidelines. And the store is located on Lisker at Larch in Sudbury, and it's right beside Salty Dog Bagels.
Oh, sounds like books and bagels are a thing to do.
There's lots of coffee, bagels, muffins.
I wish I was closer. Heather, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
It was great to chat with Heather, because I thought it would be great for you, dear listener, to get a feel for perspective of a publisher, particularly a publisher who has a mandate or a slant to publish writers of from a certain region or whatever. I guess you could call them a regional publisher in that regard. And it's important for you, if you're looking at working with a publisher, to understand the publisher's perspective and what they're actually looking for. And so I know if you're not from Northern Ontario or have no ties to Northern Ontario, that may seem, well, that's no good for me. But it's important to understand, because you heard Heather's perspective and some of the advice that she gave to writers. And speaking of the advice she gave to writers, what I really wanted to reflect on is she said something that I've taken for granted all these years. And it was her idea of, it'd be really good if a writer got a chance to work at a bookstore. I'm lucky. I worked at bookstores from 1992. Then the last time I worked in a physical bookstore, bricks and mortar bookstore, was 2011. And so I've had a lot of experience working in different bookstores, and I do take it for granted. But the reason she suggests that is because you get the opportunity to see it from the customer's perspective. Somebody walks into the bookstore and is looking for something to read. Why don't they, from an author's perspective, you're like, well, my book. No. What is the reader's perspective? What was the last book they read, and what's something that they want to read? And so the bookseller's job, or joy in many ways, is finding that right book from a selection of books. The smallest, I was going to say the smallest, but the smaller bookstores would have maybe between 5,000 to 10,000 titles in stock. A big box store, when you think about like a Chapters, an Indigo, a Barnes & Noble, a W.H. Smith, trying to think of the different chains for different countries, depending on where you're from. Sorry, I gave you a number of them. I hope that gives you an example and you know enough to put it in perspective for your own store. But a big box store would be anywhere from 75,000 to 100,000 titles. And then so how does the bookseller help them find something? And the reason I was thinking about this is because, I've had that experience, so I take it for granted, and I always talk about that. But here's a thought. Here's something. If you have a local independent bookstore, and again, this is not something to do at Christmas. I am recording this December 9th, 2021. Do not go in at Christmas time. They're too busy, especially because of the pandemic. They're desperately hoping, if they're able to be open, to actually sell a lot of books and make up for all of the lost revenue that so many small businesses have faced in the last 20 months. But maybe sometime in the new year, when things settle down and things are quieter, opportunity to go and introduce yourself to your local bookseller and see, potentially, is there a way that you could just volunteer to help out? You say, hi, I'm a local author, and I really would like to understand bookselling, and I'd love to, if I can come in and work a few hours here or a few hours there, love to help you out, because I really just want to understand more about this side of things, so that I, as an author, can, use, like, here, I'm going to give you some of my time. I'm going to help out some things. I'm going to learn lots of things about what people are into. And that may be a thing, and maybe not. They might not be interested. They might be interested, but it never hurts to ask. Because, to be quite honest, the last opportunity I got to actually work in a bookstore, I was actually working at Kobo, and because Kobo partners with bookstores, right? So Kobo's partner here in Canada was Indigo, Chapters Indigo, and what they had at Christmas time, one of the Christmas seasons, they had Kobo staff, because the staff at a bookstore are overwhelmed at Christmas season. So what they did is they had Kobo staff come in and stand near the Kobo devices, the tables, so that the bookstore staff could focus on selling books to people. And these poor guys are like, people are going to come in and go, oh, I'm thinking of buying an e-reader for my wife for Christmas, and what should I get? And and the poor booksellers, they got enough on their plate, right? It's busy, it's Christmas, it's crazy. It's like, what's this latest bestseller? And what do this other book? And they're running around. Trust me, I've done it for numbers of years. I understand what it's like. So Kobo had staff who worked in an office who understood the Kobo devices really, really well, volunteer at selected locations throughout the greater Toronto area and work in the stores. And I did a number of shifts at the Indigo in Burlington, Ontario. It was actually the very first, just a little trivial fact for you book nerds out there. The very first Chapters bookstore, which was the first super chain in Canada, opened up in Burlington. And the very first Indigo, which was a separate company back then, opened up in Burlington, Ontario. So Burlington is about an hour-ish or more, depending on traffic. Could be 4 hours during heavy traffic. I'm just kidding. Feels like it. From Toronto, east of Toronto, and just on Hamilton, Ontario, where I lived for a number of years, is just on the other side of Burlington. And so that was like an optimal space, not too close to Toronto where the real estate was too expensive, but not too far away. Anyways, so I was working at the wow, that was quite an aside. I do that a lot. Oh, well, what are you going to do? It's my podcast. So the Indigo, I was there at Christmas time working at the Kobo desk, and people would come up and ask questions. Now, the poor bookseller staff that would get asked Kobo questions, and again, they don't have much information about them. They're there. It's kind of like this other thing, right? It's an otherworldly thing, and in many ways, a lot of booksellers maybe even see that as a threat to the book business, as opposed to being complementary, which is how I view them. But I was in the opposite situation because I was there with a Kobo shirt on because we were branded not to look like bookstore staff, kind of like we're guests, like the people at Costco who don't work there but are giving out free samples because they work for another company. I was there to provide information about Kobo and talk to people because I was knowledgeable about it, of course, which was great. But then I'm standing there looking like a staff member because I'm helping people. And inevitably, people asked me book questions. And I'll be honest with you, book selling is in this cat's blood. Heck, I help customers when I'm a customer and I overhear that they need help with something because I know enough about books that I want to help them. Hey, I tidy, I reorganize, I re-alphabetize when things are out of place. I tidy displays. I do that. I can't help it. So I ended up hand selling books to customers, taking them around and helping them sell books. I mean, I had so much fun that it reminded me of the value of that. And I was even thinking, yeah, maybe I should try and just go and volunteer at a local bookstore just to see if I can, I miss that. I really miss the authentic connection of, working with the customers and finding out what they like. But anyways, that's just an aside. But that was the last time. Maybe it was 2016, I guess, was the last time I had that opportunity. So I got to get back into it. I really did. I actually did apply to work part-time at the local library here in town. Because, again, I've never actually worked in a library, and I thought the experience would be great. And the job I applied for was basically, I think it was the person who was just going around and restocking books. But I thought, what a great way to learn about what's going on. So that's sort of a thing I'm going to put out there for you, is maybe there's an opportunity for you to do that either at your local bookstore or either at your local library. Because one of the things you will walk away with is a much better appreciation that, yes, it's about you and it's about your book and it's awesome and that's wonderful. But it's really about that customer. It's about that patron who is in there looking for the right book to read and trying to line that up. So when you're doing your marketing efforts as an author, what's the information you can provide about your book that can help somebody, librarian or bookseller, in that position to help them help customers? It's not buy this book, it's great. This is a book that will appeal to people who are looking for this or need that, who have read these titles. That's called comp titles that we talk about in the business. But anyways, when Heather said that, I paused the editing of the podcast. I didn't pause in the interview. I just kept going with the interview. When I was listening back to it, I paused and listened to that and thought about that and thought, wow, it's been too long for me. And I wonder if other authors may benefit from that experience. And who knows? Maybe you make an amazing connection with a local bookstore or a local librarian that can be something that you will value and cherish as a writer. Well, that's it for this reflection. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And a special thank you to the patrons of the Stark Reflections podcast who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. For your wonderful patronage, you do get extra bonus content, including an episode I posted later today, which is really just speaking of Kobo, a press release that Kobo released on December 9th, 2021. It's kind of like a review and overview of reading habits of Canadians. So it was a study not just about buying habits, but reading habits. So there's a bit of best-selling books from the last year, but also books that people actually finished. Because, a retailer like Kobo actually knows when people finish books or not. Like Santa Claus, they know if you've been, when you've been bad or good. So be good and read all the books, for goodness sake. But anyway, so that all I did for that is there'll be a link to it in the show notes over at starkreflections.ca for this episode. But again, to try and make things easier for my patrons, I thought, why not just read that report so my patrons can benefit from, listening to it while they're washing the dishes, walking the dog, going for a jog, driving, whatever it is where you listen to the podcast. But wherever you listen to this podcast, thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the podcast, of course, there's the Patreon, but you don't have to do that. Even though I do love my patrons, and thank you very much, you awesome patrons, you can support the podcast by leaving a review on the podcatcher of your choice, or better yet, sharing it with a friend that you think would find value in the podcast. So, until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, dreaming of being back in a bookstore and putting books in customers' hand. And while I'm dreaming of that, I'm wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com. So I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm really trying to get better with my words. I repeat a lot of the same words in this podcast. So the other day I bought a thesaurus, so I could expand my vocabulary. But when I got home, I discovered that all of the pages were blank. Right now I have no words to describe how angry I am.